Good afternoon. This is Shelley Feist, the Executive Director of the Partnership for Food Safety Education. And I want to welcome you to today's webinar of the Partnership for Food Safety Education. We're always so glad to see the wide variety of backfighters, people in dietetics and in food safety, in public health, in cooperative extension. We welcome you, and we're very excited today to get in depth on the topic of consumers and home refrigeration practices. Very briefly, many of you know the Partnership for Food Safety Education, but our work is to deliver trusted science-based behavioral health messaging and a network of resources that support consumers in their efforts to reduce risk of foodborne illness. And we do this as a collaborative partnership that includes federal agencies, the USDA, FDA, the CDC, significant partnerships with food industry associations and private companies, the Consumer Federation, and other leading health and scientific nonprofit organizations. So that's about the partnership, and you can always learn more about us at fightbac.org, fightback.org. We're going to get right into the topic today. Quickly, I want to remind you that you can earn CE certificates from CDR and NEHA, and that at this link at teamfoodsafety.org, resources, presentations, you can obtain more information about getting your credits for participation today. I really urge you to think about questions as we go through the webinar today, and at any time to type your question into the chat box. By using chat, you can send a question that only us, the presenters, see, or the organizers see. If you'd like to share your question with the entire group, you can use the question function. That way, everyone on the webinar will see the question you've posted in their chat box. Hopefully, you all are seeing that chat box on the lower right hand of your screen. We also have a post-survey that will launch immediately after the webinar. Your participation in those helps so much because it helps us get a better sense of how we're serving you, your response, and it gives you a chance to give us input on topics and other matters that help us provide you with the best programming and the best materials. So thank you, backfighters, for your work to prevent foodborne illness across the United States, and welcome to the Fight Back Brown Bag webinar. Today's speakers, we're so fortunate to have a leading expert on home refrigeration practices of consumers in the United States. And we also will be previewing with you today a new campaign of the Partnership for Food Safety Education on home refrigeration, and we're thrilled to have Ashley Bolden with us for that. She is with an agency in New York called the Food Group, and she's going to tell you a little bit about the communications planning around this new campaign. So, Dr. Godwin with us today. She's professor and director of the didactic program in dietetics in the Department of Family and Consumer Sciences at Tennessee State University. Many of you in cooperative extension will know of her work. She's definitely been a leader in consumer food safety education research. She serves as program leader for the Food, Bioscience, and Technology team in the College of Agriculture, Human, and Natural Sciences. She's a graduate of Kansas State University, and she's received more than $11 million in external funding since joining the faculty at TSU. She specializes in research around consumer prevention of foodborne illness, and her work's been featured on National Public Radio, The Jay Leno Show, The John Test Show, and in dozens of magazines and newspapers. And I think you'll see how useful it is to have this in-depth research on consumers and their home refrigeration practices as you hear from Dr. Godwin today. So thank you, Dr. Godwin, for being with us.
Thank you, Shelley, and I'm very pleased to be here. It's kind of a different experience being from Nashville, and I guess you can hear the southern accent. So I'm going to talk today about some studies we've been conducting for about 14 years at Tennessee State University. So We'll be covering several aspects of the fight back, the 4 major messages of fight back. And so look at the next slide, please. I would assume that most of the people on the webinar are aware that organisms that can cause foodborne illness grow best between 40 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit, or sometimes referred to as the danger zone. However, there are some that can continue to multiply at lower temperatures, and others that can survive for long periods of time in foods. In addition, some of the bacteria that are in the refrigerator can cross-contaminate foods that they come in contact with. The survival and growth of microorganisms in refrigerators is a hazard in foods, particularly in products that are consumed without further cooking, such as produce or things like cheese, and things that we don't tend to heat correctly. And even the surfaces of the refrigerator can be contaminated with microorganisms, and these can be transferred to food. So if you don't properly store the foods that are put into the refrigerator, they can also cross-contaminate other foods. Our goals of research at TSU are pretty broad, but basically we deal with anything related to consumer knowledge and practices, especially in what we're talking about today, which is dealing with the refrigerator and the chill message. And so we have done numerous studies looking at refrigerator temperatures, thermometer usage, storage of refrigerated foods, the organization of the refrigerator, cleaning the refrigerator surfaces, and the bacterial contamination of the refrigerators. More specifically, we have, this just summarizes quickly some of the studies that we've done. We're kind of known as the people that like to snoop in people's refrigerators, and so we literally, do a lot of surveys. But knowing that surveys are not really indicative of what people really do, we have gone into many, many people's homes across the United States and looked at what they're actually doing, compared many times to what they say they were doing. And when we go into the homes, we observe everything, in the refrigerator, from the tightness of the seal on the door to how clean the refrigerator is, where foods are located, where things are stored. We have really extensive spreadsheets that we use to mark where things are stored and what's next to them, and dates and everything else. And most recently, we've been doing laboratory studies with my colleague, Dr. Chen, and looking at the survival of some of the bacteria that are common, and then even identifying bacteria to see which ones are there. So we're going to actually quickly go through reviewing a lot of the studies that we've done. I've tried to kind of do a compilation presentation, so you'll see some ranges on some of the slides, because as I said, we've done many, many different studies, and we would be here for the next 3 days if I presented all of them. So let's begin just talking about what we have found over the years. This is a question from some of our surveys, and this means that we're not at the home right this minute. And the survey is, what is the temperature within the refrigerator? What we found was quite interesting is that people were quite honest, but unfortunately did not know the temperature in the refrigerator. And so on the next slide, you'll see that we asked them then to try to guess at it, really. What do they think the temperature is? And again, 40% of them wouldn't even venture to guess what the temperature is. So that's not good. That does mean that people are not regularly checking temperatures. And then we have done follow-up to many of our surveys. Some of the bigger surveys where we had over 500 people that we surveyed, we did go into homes, and so we've been into over 700 homes now. And so sometimes when we ask them if they had a thermometer even in the refrigerator that they could check if they wanted to, only about, depending on which survey we were doing, between 6 and 19% of them said that they had a thermometer. And then when we went into those homes and actually looked, the sad part was we had none in some studies actually had a thermometer, and up to 9% who actually had a thermometer. When we looked for where the thermometer was, the majority of them were on the top shelf, and unfortunately that was in the front of the top shelf, which is not as cold as the back, but at least they were there. But remember, this is a very, very small number because there was only 9% total in some of the studies that even had one. So assuming that as backfighters, that you all have a thermometer in your refrigerator, We would now like you to take a poll to tell us when the last time you checked that thermometer was, to see what the temperature was. Select one of the following. Have you checked it within the last day, between 2 and 7 days ago, more than a week ago, more than a month ago, or you don't check the temperature of the home refrigerator? That would include people that don't have a thermometer at all, I think. Okay, and you should see the poll on your screen now. And we did have a goodly number that said they checked it within the last 24 hours. So that's good. That's indicating that as backfighters, you are doing a pretty good job. However, unfortunately, we do have over a fourth of you who don't check it at all, and almost a fourth that have checked it more than a month ago. It is actually really important that you check that temperature every single day. I told my colleague I check mine every time I open the refrigerator, and he thought I was kind of crazy, but I'm kind of paranoid, I guess, that this is the work we do. Okay, moving on. We also did an assessment of the cleanliness because, as I mentioned, the bacteria actually can spread onto foods when they're put into the refrigerator. We've looked at the tightness of the door seals, the fullness of the door seals, and then we did done a lot of temperature assessment itself. And so we're going to review quickly some of that data. This is when we went into the homes, we left the thermometer there for either 3 days or 7 days, and we actually used what's known as a temperature logger. And so this is just a picture of where those loggers were located, in the back of the bottom, in the back of the top, on the door. Of course, this had to be kind of lenient in deciding where that was because many refrigerators are configured differently. So we had actually very complex designs for how we would place it depending on what the refrigerator looked like inside. So we left the loggers there for up to 7 days. After we placed the logger in the refrigerator, we did check the tightness of the refrigerator door seal, and about 4/5 or 80%, 81% were either tight or very tight, which is good. And unfortunately, the rest were loose in places or very loose. And so we did recommend to those people that they might want to consider having that seal fixed, and some people said, good, I get to buy a new refrigerator now. And then looking at the general cleanliness, we gave it 4 ratings of very clean down to dirty. And it's good that most of the people that we looked at we considered clean or very clean. However, unfortunately, there was a large percentage that we were not pleased with, and we're going to show you a few pictures of these. Now, this is a refrigerator that actually got a very clean rating, even though it may not be the best organization and things may not be in the places they ought to be. You do not see too much indication of any dirty spots. This is another one that was considered fairly clean. Now, do remember that these people knew we were coming, and so we kind of expected to see a large percentage that were clean. However, there were many that were not. It kind of surprised me because I said if I knew somebody was coming to my house to look in my refrigerator, I might have done a better job. But this is one that was just considered slightly dirty, and if you look at, mostly it's because on the bottom right edge you'll see there is some mold kind of in there, and then if you can see through the plastic on the bottom right, you'll see some spillage down there. And on the next one, this is one of my least favorites. I'm doing egg research now, and we're very unpleased to see that there's actually a dried up, broken egg on the door. We don't know how long it had been there. This one shows a typical refrigerator, and that there tend to quite frequently be spillage in the bin that vegetables had been in. In many cases, they actually had put a paper towel over it. I guess they thought we wouldn't notice it, but then when we lifted up the paper towel, we saw things like you'll see in this picture. And again, here's some mold in the back of the refrigerator. We also assess the fullness of the refrigerator because, as you'll hear a little bit later, also that it's good to have air circulating so the cool air can get around and the hot air can be pulled out. And so we did find that almost half of the refrigerators we looked at, especially on the door, were very, very full. And so there are many people out there who are overfilling their refrigerator. And here's an example of one that is very full. Not much space left. I guess they could have crammed a few more things in there if they wanted to. If we wanted to stay on this picture for a while, you'd also see some other things they're doing that are not recommended, such as those eggs just kind of floating around in that bin by themselves, which is kind of odd. This is also another one that we considered full. We did give this a not a very full because we did think if they really wanted to shove those things over, they could. We also found many non-food items in the refrigerator, some that we could not even identify. My least favorite, and almost got sick, was a package of worms that was in the refrigerator. And here's just an example of one of the refrigerators, one of the items we found. We're not exactly sure what this is, a baster or a syringe of some kind. It's rusty. We don't know how long it's been there. And right next to it is a Butterfinger that appears to have been open and kind of rolled under. So this was not a good picture at all. And more recently, we started looking at the storage of foods in the refrigerator, especially leftover foods. And so we were looking at multiple conditions that might lead to cross-contamination. So we looked at things like are the containers that are in there covered or sealed, and these don't have to be leftovers, though. In this case, they could have been something like a pitcher or a container that had a drink in it. But we also looked to see if leftovers were dated, as is recommended, and only found that in 2% of the refrigerators did we even find a leftover dated. Cross-contamination means that it could be a combination of many things, such as is there meat above produce, or are there any moldy foods, are there open containers, anything like that. So it's kind of a combination. So we did find in almost half the homes that cross-contamination might exist in that refrigerator. Oh, hello? Okay, my screen just went blank. Hold on a minute. I don't know what's going on. Sorry, I think my computer shut itself down. Hold on. I wasn't moving enough. There we go. And so this is a very good picture of a bad picture, if you want to look at it. You'll see all kinds of bad things in this picture, such as mold on that refrigerator door. You'll see a hot dog at the bottom that's obviously still in its wrapper, but kind of just loosely wrapped and stuck on the door. Pictures that are uncovered. There's a milk carton that's missing a lid. So this is just one of the examples. And the next one you'll also see there are some bowls that are uncovered. There's still a spoon in there. There's a watermelon and a cantaloupe that weren't even wrapped. And in the upper left, you'll notice that there is meat on the top shelf, and I love it that it's right over the eggs. So I think this is probably the worst refrigerator we looked at, except for the one that was nothing but mold, because they've done everything possibly wrong I think they could have in our assessment. Okay, and here's just another quick one. You'll see a pan with a spoon in it. It's open. It's just laying there, and some bowls that are just open. So finally, as part looking at the temperature data, like as you said earlier, we did put the loggers in there. Or sometimes we've gone in and used infrared thermometers, and sometimes we just look at the temperature if they had a thermometer in the refrigerator. So again, this is a compilation, and this is just the data that we actually assessed in a couple of our studies. And this is a typical over 3 days how the temperature fluctuates. The top line being the door, and the door is always the hottest. in the refrigerator, and almost always the door is over the recommended temperature of 40 degrees or below. And then it fluctuates to where the other part is. But this is kind of typical. This just indicates the defrost cycle came on or went off, or sometimes they didn't open the door for quite a while. Almost every time they open the door is when you'll see a peak. And this is another just a really bad refrigerator. This one, had temperatures as high as 60, almost 60 degrees for a long period of time. And this is kind of a reversed one, though. The door actually was cooler than the bottom shelf in this one. And then one more just as an example. This is typical. It kind of goes along, and it doesn't fluctuate a whole lot over time. But then they probably had a major event, and they put a whole lot of warm food in there, and it took several hours for the temperature to come back down. So assessing that, and a lot of it had to be done by hand. So again, I'll credit Dr. Chin, who I think is on this webinar. This is just kind of review quickly of the temperatures we found, and this is a shelf, and you're looking sort of in the middle at the bottom, looking for the temperature of 40 degrees or below. And you'll see that the majority of the refrigerators that we looked at did have temperatures over 40 degrees or below, with a mean of 41.6, but many of them were even higher than that, some going up to almost 60 degrees. And the next one, you'll see a comparison with the top shelf, and you'll see, again, if you can find the 40 along the bottom, you'll see that the majority of the refrigerators we looked at were below that recommendation, which is good. It's kind of interesting that we had several, if you look way down at the bottom, even in the below 30-degree range. So I don't know why all their food wasn't frozen. Maybe it was, but it seemed kind of odd. And then this is what's really important is how many hours a day. And so if you think about 24 hours in a day, how long the temperature was above 41 degrees. And this one, again, is the door, and most of the refrigerators were above 41 degrees all day long. And so that indicates that the door is not a good place to store foods unless it's something that is not going to be critically impacted by a temperature. And the next one is the top shelf. You see almost a reverse thing here, and that's that almost all of them were either not above the temperature of 41 degrees at all, or didn't stay there very long if they got above it. So again, indicating the top shelf is the coolest place in the refrigerator, which makes sense. That's typically where the cool air comes in. And then our most recent studies is the microbiological evaluations that we're looking at. Over time, we've looked at it for different factors, and I'm just going to show you quickly where we found the most bacteria. Because microbial contamination, can be found in various locations, and we also were looking for actual cross-contamination by the bacteria through some very complex DNA studies, and how long bacteria actually survive in the refrigerator. So one of our big studies, this is just general bacteria data. It's very busy, but if you look across the top where it says location, you'll see that the higher the number, that means the more bacteria there are. And if you converted this to actual numbers, you're talking about millions and millions of bacteria in some cases. But if you look at the red hexagon, it's showing that the vegetable bin is the dirtiest place in the refrigerator. And we found this in several studies now. That tends to be consistent, and I don't know why, but I don't know, people don't clean it as often or what. But you will also notice that other places also had fairly high numbers. There is no actual acceptable number. 0 would be the preferred, wouldn't it? But you do find that several of the other places, especially the bottom shelf and the meat drawer and the middle shelf, also are very dirty, in our opinion. One good thing was that we did not find any Listeria monocytogenes or Salmonella in any of the refrigerators that we tested. However, we did find other Listeria species and many other bacteria that are potentially pathogenic. One that we were talking about when it was on the Jay Leno show, and they made a joke about it, was Klebsiella pneumoniae, which is a bacteria that can cause pneumonia. And he said, if you're going to get pneumonia from your refrigerator, why don't you just shut the door? So that was the most common bacteria, and was found in approximately a third of the refrigerators that we tested. We also are looking at whether the actual same bacteria is traveling from one food to another in the refrigerator, and so we did take samples from leftovers that were in open containers in the same refrigerator and conduct analysis to decide if it was the exact same bacteria. And we did find that it was, and so therefore bacteria can and do travel from one food to another if they're not properly covered. And I think if we could spread this word a little more, that we actually have proof that the bacteria does travel, we might get people to do a better job of covering their leftovers tightly. And then the more recent studies that we're doing and are still in the process is Salmonella, looking at how long it actually survives in the refrigerator, and on packages that people might have touched. And in this particular case, we're working with chicken juice. And so our first study, we looked at refrigerator shelves, milk cartons, and bread wrappers that were stored in the refrigerator, took samples over time, and found that Salmonella does survive for over 6 hours, so it doesn't die off quickly in the refrigerator. And some were still alive up to 96 hours later. And so this concerns me in particular, in that means anything you put in that refrigerator within that period of time could be cross-contaminated with Salmonella. We're in the process of repeating this with Campylobacter at the present time. So in conclusion, a large percentage of home refrigerators are not at recommended temperatures. Most people don't even have a thermometer in their refrigerator. Those who said they did, we typically found that it was actually the thermostat, that they could adjust the dial that had A through E or 1 through 5 or something like that on it. Most people's leftovers were not dated. A whole lot of them are improperly stored. And we did find that there was pathogenic bacteria in home refrigerators and that they may cross-contaminate foods. A lot of people work with me, obviously. We're doing this many different studies, and here are just some of the credits. As Dr. Chin, I've mentioned several times, is my lifesaver, and several other people. We work with Kansas State University and Research Triangle Institute. And give credit to FDA CIPSAN for funding part of this work in our earlier days. USDA 1890 programs, which has contributed recently, and one that I've neglected to put on here is the studies we're doing right now are funded by AFRI, an AFRI program by USDA.
Thank you, Dr. Godwin. I want to remind all of you that we will be taking questions, so please submit your questions through the chat function and make sure it goes to all of the organizers. Alternatively, if you type your question into the question bar, it will be seen by everyone, and that's okay, but you can choose your method. I'm sure you have questions for Dr. Godwin because she presented a lot in a short time, and I encourage you to start submitting your questions now. We're very happy to have with us today Ashley Bolden. She's Engagement Planning Director for the Food Group. The engagement of the Food Group by the Partnership for Food Safety Education follows a pretty intense process whereby we convened a group of scientist experts to review the current messaging around home refrigeration, which is under a campaign we call Back Down. This campaign was originally based on a 2003 risk assessment of the Food and Drug Administration and the USDA about listeria, where it was found that the #1 thing that could be done to reduce incidences of listeriosis in the United States would be to ensure that consumers' refrigerators are at or below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So we have been working on this messaging for a while, but what we wanted to do was do a major refresh of the campaign and to get some more audience-specific communications, and that's what Ashley's going to talk about. We also convened a communications working group that gave us a lot of terrific feedback and worked on the development of personas, etc. So all this is by way to say that this has been developing for a while, and we really wanted to preview today with you the plan of action on communications, because we will be asking you all to take part in the campaign because of your significant ability to reach consumers in your communities and through your channels. So we had the pleasure of working with the food group on development of Produce Pro, which is a great campaign released last year around safe handling of fresh fruits and vegetables. So Ashley, you're up, and thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Shelley. I'm happy to be here. So I'm first just going to take you through what it is I'm going to tell you about today. And first of all, I'm just going to take you through a little bit of a background on why this campaign is important. And then I'm going to tell you what the purpose of us, even though Shelley, you gave a great introduction, I'm just going to rehash what the purpose was, and then what our goals are with the campaign, as well as who we're trying to reach, what we're going to tell them, how we're going to tell them, and then finally with the outreach plan, where we're going to tell them. So first and foremost, just a little bit of background. So each year, about 1,600 people in the U.S. get sick from Listeria. 9 out of 10 of these people infected are one of the following at-risk populations. They're either pregnant women who are 10 times more likely to contract, or Hispanic pregnant women who are 24 times more likely, or elderly folks ages 65 and older who are 4 times more likely. And studies show that Listeriosis cases could be reduced by more than 70% if all home refrigerator temperatures did not exceed 41 degrees Fahrenheit. So with that one thing being in control, we could reduce Listeriosis cases by 70%. And I say this all to say that Listeria is only one of the potential pathogens or culprits, but it attributes or is attributed to the highest mortality rate, which is why we focus on it in particular. So the purpose of our work with the food group's work with Shelley and the PFSE group is to refresh and reissue that campaign that she mentioned, which is the Back Down campaign, which does focus on home refrigeration, and it strives to educate consumers about the importance of home refrigerator practices, which, as we just learned, thank you to Sandria, is very, very important because obviously a lot of folks are simply uneducated on the matter and don't realize that they hold the ropes in terms of reducing their own foodborne illness, particularly Listeriosis. And so the goals of this campaign, it's really one goal with a sub-goal, if you will. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to get out there and teach these consumers, particularly the at-risk populations that I mentioned earlier, about the importance of keeping their home refrigerator temperature at 40 degrees or below, because as we just learned, many, many people do not. And how they can do that is to use a thermometer to monitor their refrigerator temperature. So when all is said and done, we want our at-risk populations and consumers in general to know how important it is to keep and monitor their home refrigerator temperature. And so let's take a deep dive into who we're trying to talk to with this campaign. And I would say we have, 2.5, I would say, target groups here, because obviously Hispanic pregnant women are a subset of pregnant women. But these are a really big group. So let's start on the left with pregnant women. So at any given time in the U.S., there are about 3.3 million pregnant women. The mean age at this point of all pregnancy first births in the U.S. is about 26. So it's a pretty young demographic that we're going after. Like perhaps some of you or many of you have had experience with, or perhaps are right now, about half of these are still working full time. So these are very busy ladies, and they get their prenatal care from a variety of sources, from both their primary care physicians and from OBGYNs. We also did a little bit of looks into where they get their information about food safety or about their pregnancy, and I'll get into that in just a moment, but that's what those little icons on the bottom are. First and foremost, though, I want to subset into the Hispanic pregnant women, and we chose to target them in particular simply because they are at a bit of a higher risk because the queso fresco and other items that they tend to eat more of are more likely to be contaminated. So Hispanic pregnant women, a few items or things to note about them is that they actually have a higher birth rate than the general population. They tend to have their first child a little bit younger, and they're concentrated in specific areas of the United States. To be specific, California, Florida, and Texas are where the majority of your population lives. They speak Spanish at the home, and they tend to seek care later in their pregnancy. This all matters from a marketing perspective because when we go about trying to talk to them, things like speaking Spanish in the home matter because we need to make sure our materials are translated. And then, excuse me, looking at the other demographics, it's just important to note, you know, what age group we're talking about and where they're getting their information. So getting a bit into that. For the majority, or not the majority, but the general population of pregnant women, they're very active on social media, and this includes the Hispanic pregnant women. This includes Pinterest, this includes Facebook, it could include Instagram, and that is, as most of you are probably have experience in or are well aware of, this includes how they interact these days, I know myself included, with their friends and family, is over social media, and those are the folks who they depend on a lot for pregnancy-related information. The general population does a lot of tracking. Perhaps you guys are familiar with the bump or what to expect. These are both content providers, as we would call them, or Fit Pregnancy would be another publication, but they're seeking out sources, whether it be a magazine or an app or an email list where you can sign up and let them know when your due date is, and they send you an email every week with an update on your pregnancy. But most people, most women are taking care or are tracking their pregnancies through these apps. And these apps or emails or publications are also giving them a lot of other information about their pregnancy and how to stay healthy. For the Hispanic pregnant women in particular, they tend to read the Spanish speaking content provider or magazines such as Sir Padre. So that's important for us to note as well. And then we have our adults age 65 and older. So clearly a very different demographic than our young 20-something pregnant mother or about to be mother. And at any given time, there are currently about 44.7, almost 45 million adults age 65 and older in the U.S. So it's a very, very large population that we're going after. And given that once they turn 65, their expected years to live is still 20 plus years sometimes, we're speaking to there's still a very large group, and you know, their ages vary. A 65 to 75-year-old, especially the younger group in this, the younger subgroup in this group, are still very independent. So a lot of them still live alone. Women actually outnumber men in this group. The men are more likely to be married, but again, it's important to note that a lot of these folks do live alone, so they're practicing their own food safety. And their leisure time and the information that they get tends to come, whereas the younger ladies are using apps and social media and are very into their handheld devices. Your older generation is getting their news and information from very traditional sources like the TV and the newspaper. So now that we've learned about, oh, just kidding, now we have a poll. And so what we would like to know of you guys, of the three audiences that we just talked about and introduced to you, being pregnant women, Hispanic pregnant women, adults age 65 or older, and then also other immunocompromised populations or the general public, which of these audiences do you currently work with the most, or are you most interested in working with? So you can choose one now. All right. It looks like a lot of you work with our older adults. That's great. We have some good tools coming your way, as well as the general public, which definitely could include our target populations for sure. Okay, so now that we have learned who it is this campaign is targeting, let's talk about what it is that we have to tell them or need to tell them. So our messages, as I mentioned in our objective slide, the main message and the main objective is to get folks to relate food safety to the refrigerator temperature, or the importance of refrigerator temperature. So our main message and our main, what we would call a call to action, or what we want them to do upon seeing any of our communications, is to know that they need to keep their refrigerator temperature at 40 degrees or below, and that they can do that by using a thermometer. There will be a lot of good information in the items that we give you and in the tools that we give you, and that will include supporting messages. So just like Sandra talked about how folks they looked at, the cleanliness, and they looked at how folks were storing food in their refrigerator. We clearly saw the need for this type of education. So always supporting the refrigerator temperature message will be information on the importance of how to correctly keep and store food, how to thaw food, how to keep your refrigerator both decluttered and sanitized, and then what foods are associated with Listeria and or are risky for them. And so now that we know what message we're trying to get across, the items, or the communications in particular, will take on different tones for each of our audiences. And this is simply because our audiences are receptive in different ways. For example, pregnant women. I personally do not have any children. However, I have spoken to many who say that the moment they get pregnant, what they feel like is that everything they read tells them something else they no longer can do. So they can no longer have a glass of wine. They can no longer eat soft cheese. They can no longer eat sushi. So we want to make sure that our messages, in order to not come across as something else they have to do or can't do, our messages come across as nurturing and positive, as well as healthy, i.e. how to keep yourself healthy and your baby healthy during your pregnancy, as well as, of course, informative. They need to get the facts. For adults age 65 and older, the reason that we noted earlier that many of them live alone is that, again, 65, 60 is the new 50, right? So these folks, I like to think of them, these are folks my mother's age, and my mother certainly values her independence, and a lot of this demographic does. So it's very important in talking to this group that we frame the message as something that is empowering to them, that they can easily implement, and that it's simple, and that we don't talk down to them in any way, so that we come across as a trusted source of information. And then moving on to look at, now that we've seen who our targets are, what we're going to tell them, and how we're going to tell them, let's look at where we're going to tell them. So on our side, so the food group will work alongside Shelley and her team, and we'll be doing our own outreach. And it'll differ based on our target group. So for pregnant, and Hispanic pregnant women, we will be reaching out to those content providers or those apps or websites or trackers to give them our message and get them to include their message when they talk to pregnant women. So essentially it's called PR outreach. We basically want them to pick up the message. If any of you have ever seen a lot of the content on these websites, while there is information on food safety, most of it actually doesn't include any information on refrigerator temperature. So our goal is to get that refrigerator temperature message in there when they talk to ladies about food safety. We're also going to mail kits out to physicians' offices. This includes OBGYNs mostly, where these ladies are going for their prenatal care. And we're going to mail out kits to the physicians' offices that will be things like a printable brochure that they can print and put in the lobby or in the waiting room that the target ladies or women can pick up while they're waiting on their doctor's appointments. We'll also give them background information so that if the physician is so obliged, he or she can actually tell them a little bit of the background of why it's so important to follow these home food safety rules. That's a little bit of a harsh word, but guidelines. And then for our adults age 65 and older, we're going to do the same types of things, but to different outlets. So since our older adults are watching more TV and they're reading the newspaper and they might even be members of AARP, we'll be doing the same thing there, trying to get them to pick up on the refrigerator temperature message, but we're going to try and get them to pick it up and show, say, a video on the local news, on a local news segment as more of a public service announcement, as opposed to with the pregnant women where we want them to send it out with, say, pregnancy tracking information. We'll also be doing physicians' mailings for these guys, and we'll be sending the same type of information, so brochures and scientific background material out to doctors' offices. And then we will also, as Shelley mentioned, you guys are an absolutely critical part of this campaign, because we need to work in tandem to make sure that it's a success and that we can spread our message as far and wide as possible. So in addition to giving information to the physicians and to the content providers, we are also making you guys a whole batch of information or of handouts and materials. These will be things like brochures, and that was my timer. I'm over time. Sorry, Shelley. So brochures and digital materials, things like an infographic or an instructional video. We'll also give you some background materials, and then we'll be making some materials that retailers or supermarkets could use in-store as well. So we have a whole host of materials coming to you guys, and then we can definitely use your help in you guys doing your own outreach. And what we would like, can we just go forward? Yep, great. So the key to us being successful with this campaign is to work together and to make sure that we're multiplying one another's efforts. So for you guys, what we would love to charge you with is to do things like take the PowerPoint presentation and present it to your community, wherever that may be. Work with your local supermarket and see if they would be interested in giving this information out to their customers, whether it be by materials hung up in the store or in their newsletter. A lot of supermarkets have their own marketing going out to their customers, and you'd be surprised at how many will be more than happy to include your information in it. You can also, with the press release and or video, you can contact your local media outlets. So any blogs that you know of, any local television stations or local newspapers. You can also, If you do know some local physicians in your area that work with these types of groups, including your even your local just health clinic, contact them and see if they would be interested in putting some of our materials, brochures, say, in their waiting room. And then last but absolutely not least is this conversation will be going on online. We'll give you guys a hashtag, and we would love for you to share the information. Make sure you tag it so we all can be part of the same conversation, but do things like share the infographic that we give you or share the video that we give you on your own social media channels if you do indeed use social media. And with that being said, as Shelley mentioned, we are currently developing, this is a little bit of a sneak preview of what we're doing today, but we're currently developing this so that it can be ready at a critical time, which is National Food Safety Education Month, which comes in September. So just after the Labor Day holidays, everyone's kicking back into gear. We're going to deliver these goods to you, these tools that you can use, and we'll give you nice reminders of how you can help us spread the word, and then we'll also be doing our own outreach so that together we can really amplify this message and make sure that especially those target groups, but consumers in general, understand that they in fact are the first line of defense in preventing foodborne illness inside their own home. And that is all I have for you today, and I hope that you guys are excited about the campaign as we are. But please feel free to ask any questions if there was something you didn't feel that I covered.
Thank you, Ashley. We're going to move into questions. It's very exciting. You guys have a lot of questions, and we'll keep at them, understanding that we're coming up against the hour. But we will go on and answer questions for 10 minutes or so. So to our presenters, if you could keep your answers succinct so that we can get to as many questions as possible. Ashley, we had a question. What is the mean age for Hispanic pregnant women in your research?
Off the top of my head, I do not know, but I will get back to you on that.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned it was younger than for the greater population.
And it's in my notes somewhere, but I don't have it all spread out in front of me. So.
Okay, well, we'll move to some questions for Dr. Godwin, and if you come up with it, that's cool. Dr. Godwin,
yeah.
I think this is a great question because we're all wanting to make sure we communicate with consumers on this. Is there a kind of thermometer that's best for use in the refrigerator?
Without mentioning a brand name, yes, we actually purchased a particular one, and what's really important is to get the dial type that has the correct markings on it. We found many are still on the market that have 45 degrees as the correct marking, but we actually gave thermometers out, and we do prefer the dial type.
Okay, for the refrigerator and for the freezer also?
Yes.
Okay. And Dr. Godwin, where should we tell consumers to place an appliance thermometer in the fridge or freezer?
Since you want to be sure that the entire refrigerator is below 40 degrees or below, I put mine on the door because that's always the hottest, so I know if the door is 40 degrees or below, the rest of the refrigerator is a safe temperature.
Okay, so that probably leaves your upper shelf at more like 38 or something, right?
Probably, but it doesn't get too cold.
Okay. There's so many good questions about this. I do want to say before we move to another question, this recording of this webinar will be made available, as our past webinars have been, both on the Fight Back YouTube channel as well on teamfoodsafety.org/resources. And I do want to tell you quickly, and you'll see this in your email later, we are launching a new redesigned fightback.org, which will put the Team Food Safety site. So it's going to be an exciting new site. There's nothing you need to do about that. Just know that we're going to have everything on one website coming up very shortly. Dr. Godwin, this is such an area where I think consumers and even the educators have differences of opinion, and I get this question a lot. Do you recommend letting food cool before putting it in the refrigerator?
No, we don't. If you're going to cool it, it needs to be put into ice almost immediately before you put it in there. But it is okay to go ahead and put it in there. If you noticed on the slide, you'll see a little blip where the temperature goes up maybe a couple degrees, but typically, surprisingly, it doesn't go up way too high as long as you divide it into the smaller containers, as we also recommend.
Okay. We had a question again for Dr. Godwin. Did you look at bacteria on the refrigerator door handle on the outside of the refrigerator?
Yes, we did. That was a different study, and I thought, well, we're talking about chill, so I didn't include that. But we have actually assessed the door handles on about 150 homes, and they are extremely dirty. And so when you're cleaning the refrigerator, don't forget to clean that door handle.
Dr. Godwin again. Someone says, cleaning the refrigerator is a pain. Are there refrigerator designs that are easier to keep clean that you found in your research?
That's a good question. One of the things that we found is that probably the older refrigerators that have the grate for the shelf instead of the solid glass shelf actually did stay cleaner, but that makes sense because there's nothing for them to attach to that kind of falls through. But that means that the bottom shelf, which is going to catch everything, definitely would have to be cleaned very often.
Okay, thank you. Ashley, a question is being asked, are we going to have information that's translated, for Hispanic women? Will it be?
Absolutely. The items that are meant to be given out to consumers or to your target groups will, in fact, be translated into Spanish.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. We're going to move along because we are a minute past the hour. Please know that if you're not on the partnership's mailing list yet, we are often sending out what we call e-cards that address research points and more detail around home food safety. So please get on our mailing list. You can do that at our website, fightback.org. Follow us on social media, or you can contact me directly and just let me know you'd like to be added to our list if you're not already. We'll have another brown bag webinar in early September, and at that time, we'll talk more about chill. It is the theme for our Home Food Safety Education Month material for September, and we'll have what we call home food safety myths and facts that will be based on the chill message and on storage of food in the refrigerator. Thank you again for being with us today. You will get an email telling you when this webinar is available, and we are going to have a post survey that's going to launch here within a couple minutes of closing the webinar. If you do consumer education and you'd like your work to be featured on our blog, I hope you'll call me or email me. We love a very short story about what you do and a photograph, and it helps build a lot of support among the backfighter community. People love to get ideas from each other. So thanks again for being with us. Please take the post-webinar survey so we can do better for you. And thanks again, Dr. Godwin and Ashley, for your participation today.
Thank you, Shelley.
You're welcome, and have a great day.
Okay, bye-bye.